So what I'm going to do now, Martin, is ask you to take over, unmute yourself,
I am.
and ask you to open our webinar. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. It's a great response to see everyone compared to what might have been today, because today's event has grown out of the fact that we would normally be up in the Hunter Valley near Maitland doing some stargazing tonight, which I then, in preparation for the second Etheric Geography conference, thought we could open up with some practices, and a few people said yes, we would come along. Due to the lockdown situation, we changed that into this webinar. It's been a great response, but I thought it would be good just to give a bit of a background to this. In 2019, the New South Wales branch of the Anthroposophical Society asked us to do, Hilt and myself, to present a conference on etheric geography, which people mostly said, what's that? And it is a term Steiner uses, especially in relationship to medicine. And if we wanted to put it into other language, we would say it's reading the sacred script of the world. It's learning to live with the sacred natures of the skies and the human being and the earth. It's about sacred place. It's about our indigenous self, all these different things that we might name. And it's an exploration, I suppose, of how can we practically, in our culture, create new ways to relate to the landscape, to the cultures of landscape, past and present. How can we take the indications that Rudolf Steiner gave us about living in the 21st century, or certainly in the Michael Age or the end of Kali Yuga, that's been changed, that can give us some insight about living a spiritual life in relationship to nature, out of especially the anthroposophical point of view. So that's the background to that. And we were going to do a second conference now in September, which as of today is not going to happen because the whole of New South Wales has gone into lockdown. So we'll tell you more about forthcoming attractions at the end of the talk. And what I'm going to do is I'm now going to share my slideshow as we go into my part of this afternoon. And I want to give a little bit of a background to our talk. Now, why has that done that? Great. That's not supposed to be there for me. Okay, there we go. And are you going to spotlight?
You are.
I am. Good. Okay. So when we are talking, I'm just trying to do that. This is my talk is about the star map of Michaelmas, which is coming up now in the next 3 months in the Southern Hemisphere, and the cosmic imaginations. But the background to this is going to be, as I just get my controls going here, there we go. So reading the world script was a name we came up with, the three of us, Hilt, Fiona, and myself, about the energies, the etheric energies of the earth. And we want to work today with 3 layers. So we're going to observe the macrocosmic movement of the stars as the one level. That's going to be my contribution. Then Fiona will take us into a mesocosmic movement. Now, people might say, what's a mesocosmic? That means the middle cosmos. So if the stars create a macrocosm and the human being, the microcosm, the earth itself, and today it provides this mesocosmic movement. And Fiona will take us through some movements in the water and air in nature. And then the third part is going to be Hilt, talking about the macrocosmic dynamics of the etheric in the human organs and how medicinal potentization really works, also a microcosmic phenomenon. So our intention is to try and give indications how we can observe the dynamics and patterns of the life force that stream through us in the world. So hopefully by the end of the evening, you've got some things to apply to your life at home that you can look at and enliven your own relationship to these 3 realms. And in that way, we hopefully bring an understanding to the nature of the archetypal forms of movement and the forms that arise out of these movements in the world. So that's pretty much, hopefully, what we're going to be covering through this afternoon. As Fiona said at the end, we will do some forthcoming attractions and open up to question times. So here's a star map. At first, that might be completely overwhelming. It's very difficult to find a workable map of the sky. And I would just like to thank Mary Stuart Adams and her sister Patricia DeLisa, who actually made this map from other maps. And you'll start to see two movements, which I'm going to draw here. This yellow line going through here is the one line, which is known as the ecliptic. That's the path of the sun through the various star signs of the zodiac: Pisces, Taurus, Aries, Gemini, Cancer, all those different, Leo, and you see that we go through the 12 signs of the zodiac. And that's where we see the planets. So when we go out tonight, you'll see at sunset, you'll see a bright star, which is Venus, and just 2 hands above it, an almost quarter moon. That's in this line here. And every time there's a difference in the night sky, we follow it in this line. The other one is this line here, this cloud, which on a flat map is very difficult. That's known as the Milky Way. And I try to often get people to imagine an orange, that this map needs to be seen inside the skin of the orange. So the dark blue sky background is an apparent vision of a skin that's around the Earth, and in the daytime it's blue. We know it's not really there, but we do see it as a sheath around the Earth. And on that sheath, on that skin, we see these patterns of the stars. And it takes quite a bit of time to build up an understanding of how they work. So that being said, we're going to try and confine ourselves to what's happening this quarter, which goes from Leo to Virgo to Libra, this sort of realm here where the sun's going to be passing through towards Scorpio over the next time of this time of the September equinox. There we see it. These are drawings that have been made for me out of a book that was written by Elko Blattmann in German, but I've turned them upside down. So you can see at the point here is the South Pole of these three, and at the bottom is the North Pole. So this really is a first sort of challenge. Is when we're in the southern regions, we actually have to see the stars from a different point of view, which is normally we have maps with the north in the top here. But now when we see these things, this is how we actually see the map. So you see, for example, Leo here underlined in yellow is upside down for us. And we see, for example, that there are different, the centaur or Chiron is upside down for us. So when we are looking at this nighttime sky in the Southern Hemisphere, we are looking at it from the other direction. In other words, we're looking at it from the south of this line here, this ecliptic line of the sun path that passes through those. We are looking at it, and the pictures appear to us differently than the traditional maps and books that we look at, which is one of our challenges of working with the stars in the Southern Hemisphere. We are across the threshold of the sun path. In other words, we really are looking at the stars from within the realm of the etheric world, and therefore things turn the other way around. So we have to sort of look at the stars, see it upside down, and then translate that inwardly to being the other way around. I'm not going to go onto these too much, but I've underlined several constellations. So the cup, the centaur or Chiron, and the wolf, and the altar, which is up here. These are the ones that we're going to be dealing with as an important part of our Southern Hemisphere experience of the next quarter, compared to the Northern Hemisphere imagination of what we could call Michael and the dragon personified in Hercules and the dragon that comes up now in the next quarter. So we can see that the southern hemisphere stars and the northern hemisphere stars represent two different aspects. And part of the background to this is a well-known verse given by Rudolf Steiner at Christmas in 1922 to Marie Steiner. Von Siever's stars once spoke to humanity. It is world destiny that they are now silent. So when we look at the stars, it's very hard for us to hear them, and we need to relearn that. And it says, to be aware of the silence can be pain for earthly humanity. So I know many times when I go out to do my stavings, people really speak of this. It's so beautiful, and yet there's this loss that we have in the silence of these white stars with no patterns in our minds to start with. But in the deepening silence, there grows and ripens what humans speak to the stars. And this is a real key. What are we as human beings speaking to the stars? To become aware of this speaking can become the strength for the spirit of the human being, or our higher, our Atman, our spirit man, as we have called in the past, which we now need to call spirit human being. So this verse really is a key to the work with our spirituality in relationship to the rhythms of the stars and the planets that move through the constellations. Is yes, we can at one level receive the blessings from, you know, the horoscope or the astrology, and we can know whether Mars is in retrograde and how that's affecting us, all these things. At the same time, Steiner has challenged us to look at the stars and to say something to them. In fact, he goes so far as to say we need to give them new names. And that's partly what my work has been with the stars over the years, is how do we look at a star constellation? Say an easy one to look at would be Scorpio, late at night at the moment. And when I look at Scorpio 1, can I feel its energy coming towards me? What sound might it be giving? What color might it be radiating? But also, what is the beings who live and work through Scorpio feeling from my beholding them when I'm working with my meditations, for example? What do they hear coming from our ripening understanding of that? So the premises of my work has always been, and in my book and now, is that the cosmic imagination. So Steiner talks about the four quarters. We have the sun year, where we have the two solstices and the two equinoxes around December and June, and also around September and March. And when the sun reaches these points in the year, in the Northern Hemisphere, Steiner spoke in his book on the four archangels and the cosmic imaginations about these four new cosmic imaginations that arise because of the human thoughts through our festivals and our spiritual work. That's one of the first things to sort of chew on, I suppose, is that the cosmic imaginations arise anew, he says, and I'll go through that in a moment, how they do that. And in the fifth lecture, he talks about how the southern hemisphere work of a regent or an archangel in the starry skies at a particular season complement the northern hemisphere stars. And the southern hemisphere work of the archangel works into the constitution of the human being, whereas in the northern hemisphere, it's to do with the consciousness. So we could say, I've often say that the principles of Waldorf education, for example, reflect this, is that we don't bring a person a consciousness unless the constitutional organs are also prepared and transformed. And my understanding, my work has led me to see that through the cycle of the year, we need to transform both the constitution of the physical body and the soul body to accept the renewed imaginations coming to us from the starry world. And to do this, we need two sets of astronomy. Rudolf Steiner speaks about this in one of his lecture cycles, about the cosmic universal human being in relationship to the microcosm. And he says, we need to understand an astronomy that comes from the sun. And we need to also know that there's two astronomies that come from the sun, which is the tropical astronomy, which is the traditional 12 equally sized houses through the circle of the stars. There's also where the sun really is, the sidereal astronomy. The scientist says we also need a moon astronomy that we need to develop, and I'll develop that more in a little bit to tell you more about that. So we're working with stars that are in a day sky. So at the moment, when you look out your window and you're looking at the sun, what constellation do you see behind it? Can you feel that right at this moment, if you look out your window, that Leo is speaking to us through the sun? Then we also have the night sky, which is much easier for us to see the skies, but also working into that, the moon rhythms of the full moon and the new moon. So for example, we've just come out of the new moon and it's going now towards a full moon in Leo. And it's the second full moon in Leo. It's called the Stargate, and it's a blue moon. So when the full moon comes about in 2 weeks, it's going to be a blue moon in the constellation of Leo, because it's the second full moon in that constellation in full. So, and that comes from the new moon almost a week ago. And then when the full moon opens up around a particular constellation, something is blessed into the constellation through that. And we need to learn to do that anew. All of those have quite relevance for working with the Southern Hemisphere in cosmic imaginations. So Steiner talks about the cosmic imaginations coming as a future. They arise or arise again and are transformed when the first 5 elements in the activity of the festivals work together. So we need a position of the sun to the zodiac. We need to see that the Earth's elemental seasonal activity plays a role. And they're 5 geographic regions. So you have the northern polar regions, the northern Mediterranean regions, the tropical regions, and then the southern Mediterranean regions, which not a lot of people in the Southern Hemisphere actually live in. And then we have an archangel activity that works into all of that. And then finally, we have the human activity. And through the human activity, these transform the zodiac pictures and the sun forces into the cosmic imagination. Now that might be a lot to take in one moment, but it's really important for us to learn to do that. Is that through our activity, the stars that are behind or coming to us through the sun become transformed. So when I stand at this time of the year and I look into the sun, and I meditate, or I say a prayer, or I sing, or I do something spiritual, the star sign of Leo and then the ones that follow next month are transformed in such a way that a new cosmic imagination can begin to work into the earth. And there's something similar that happens here in the Southern Hemisphere. You may know this picture. Rudolf Steiner talks about how the archangels work around in the Southern Hemisphere, and at the moment, for example, we have coming towards us spring here in Sydney. Certainly spring is blossoming. It's wonderful, beautiful blue skies, and it's warm, and there's lots of flowers around. And the Archangel Raphael is at work with us in the forces of healing in the rhythmical system. Again, I'm being very precise about what I'm focusing on. I'm not going to give all 4 aspects. So here in the Southern Hemisphere, Raphael is at work in our rhythmical system, and that changes. Here below, when it is the northern autumn, as in September, Raphael works into the healing forces. We might say Raphael leaning on the staff of Mercury, supported by the inner forces of the earth. When he comes around again to the northern hemisphere in April, in spring, he raises his staff on high. And this particular quote by Steiner shows me that when the archangels in the northern hemisphere, they're working with a different energy of cosmic power to be able to draw something out of the human being. So here we see, for example, at Michaelmas, September, in the north, Michael is working through autumn, and he draws about this new cosmic imagination known as Michael's fight with the dragon. We could say that's an old cosmic imagination, but he says it will arise anew, in a new way. Whereas in the south, in the constitution of the human being, Raphael is standing and he's working through human breathing and the forces of healing in the rhythmic system. So that's one of the things that we need to look at. Where do we find Raphael in the Southern Hemisphere stars? Oh, there's a nice spelling mistake to start with. To understand the Southern Hemisphere stars, Steiner talks about in these 4 quarters of the Southern Hemisphere, we need to see that the energy that is used is to be found in the capacity of the human being, that is in the interaction between the nerve and the blood systems of the human being. And he says this: the person who endeavors through meditative, intellectual activity to grasp what streams downward and through exercises of will what streams upwards is doing light yoga in the human being. And in our time, so in the rhythmical system where Raphael is now at work in the next quarter, is the musician. So the musician in the human being is experienced in the rhythmic system when the balance, more spelling mistakes, the balance between soul and body is labile. And we can raise these inner rhythmic forces and give them form through sound and tone. We find music in the stream of the nerve currents that flow from below upwards to the brain. So when we breathe in, there are currents that flow in the human being, which we can follow with this intellectual activity and a will activity to find and renew the musical qualities within our constitution. I'm going to skip over that because it's too complicated. This is the same thing. It's a picture of our quarter. And we see here, for example, the sun is now in Leo today. Tonight, when you go out, you will see that Virgo, the Venus is about there, and the moon is about here where Spica is, the big star, and it'll be on its head. And if you look to the left of the moon, you'll see the cup and the crow, or the magpie, as we like to call them here. And we see that these parts here are what we are doing. And we see as the sun passes through here, we see that Hercules and the dragon are in the sky. These are the old imaginations which can be transformed into Michael and the dragon. So through this next quarter, as we do our spiritual work, the forces that are in the autumn time of the Northern Hemisphere, through the festivals, will speak to the stars, a renewed imagination to become Michael and the dragon. You can see how the old mythologies and the new mythologies really work with each other. However, in the Southern Hemisphere, it works slightly differently. We have these stars here that are important. We've got the cup, which, as I said, you can see tonight. If you go out and look for this shape, you'll see it. We have Chiron, it's called the centaur here, but Chiron, which is the teacher of music to humanity and of the healing arts, who is in conversation with the wolf, the lupus. So this is a really important aspect. The last quarter, this cup of energy is given from Gabriel in winter to Raphael, who through this process, as the sun passes along this line, the centaurian being within us, the musical being within us that's within our rhythmical system, in relationship to the spiritual work we do on the earth into our spring season, undergoes a process which will allow us to evolve towards standing at the altar. So a magical instrument, through a process of our constitution that is an artistic process, allows a second mythical, magical object to appear. And I'll try and illustrate that more clearly here. So we see in the Southern Hemisphere imagination that these golden bowls, the archangel holds a golden vessel. It starts with an artist. So Chiron is the artist at the moment, here is the musician healer. There's a dynamic interaction. He's speaking with the wolf. And that's transformed into a symbolic instrument. And through that, a new aspect of our human capacity out of the artist arises. So a new capacity has a macrocosmic archetype and a microcosmic human aspect that presents itself. So in September, Michael is in the north, Raphael is within the human being in the south. And what I'm trying to work with is naming this new archetype, this new transformation in the human being, is that the healer, that is the microcosmic human aspect, a healer, who brings the archetype of the bard, so the transformation of Chiron into a bard, in other words, a person who understands the musical nature of healing stories. So how can we use stories through music in the human being that is not only, and I shouldn't say only, but is based upon being able to be a musician within ourselves that's renewed through the work of spring, but at the same time, through our spiritual work, we start to awaken one of the four professions of being human as a healer who can work out of understanding the cosmic rhythms, the harmony of the spheres, not just working with the plants and the minerals of the earth as medicine, but allowing ourselves as a healer to understand these things. And we get that by following, again, these stories through the stars, which is, as the sun comes now, we go to Leo and then Virgo and Libra. We see the cup there in the south in conversation with Chiron, who is in conversation with the wolf. Sorry, it's not quite, maybe I should go back to this star one. It's much easier to follow because, as you can see, this map is actually done with the north up the top and the south down the bottom here. It's easier for our mind to follow these pictures. And yes, I'm sorry that it's that complicated. I read this wonderful quote by Steiner this morning when I was reading, and he said, yes, the more we learn about the world, the more complicated it becomes. That's anthroposophy for you. So we go from Leo through Virgo, as we see in the north here, in the northern hemisphere, with the new cosmic imagination of Hercules and the dragon will transform into Michael and the dragon, and the old work of Chiron or Chiron as the teacher of music and medicine to the human being will transform through this process from being the musician, Chiron is the musician, into the healer who stands at the altar. A healer who stands at the altar in preparation for what then can be transformed as these forces move into a higher quality. I did a talk last year about the Christmas imagination. So those who heard that, this might begin to start making sense. I'm sorry it's also compacted into 30 minutes. But what I'm trying to do is show us that our spiritual work has a deep impact upon the forces that work into us. And it is important to see that because these pictures show us that, for example, the sun now stands in Leo, but all these other constellations are also shining into the sun. And as it moves into Virgo, all these forces in the south and these forces here shine into the sun, and we change each of the 12 houses. There's a lot more to be said, but I do think I've run out of my half hour right now. And so I might just go back to that slide. The earth is not a platform for human life. It is a living being. We're not on it, but part of it. Its health is our health. And I would add our health, our spiritual health, is the health of the earth as well. So I'm going to unshare that now. How do I do that? I get to be somewhere here. There we go. So that's my contribution. Fiona, would you like to take over from there?
Yes, you were in fact a little bit under your time. I'm just, bear with me for a second while I fiddle with the controls to spotlight myself. So I'm, as Martin said, that I'm actually going to look at what we call the mesocosmic realm, the middle realm. Martin has brought us his picture of the starry imaginations, the starry pictures. I'm going to now look at the forces, particularly of earth, of around the earth, of water and air, the middle realm. But it's particularly how it looks in the world, in nature, but also as a lead-in to how these forces work within us. And to do that, to start off, I'd like to bring up, first of all, the image that many of you saw when you first arrived. This world map. So what we're actually looking at here is we're looking at a visualization of the global weather conditions, which are forecast by supercomputers, and it's updated every 3 hours. So as I move in we can see everywhere these amazing streaming, circling. Down here, it's much more open, the open meander form running along. In different places, you get these coming in, swirling into whirlpools. And what we're actually looking at here, and anybody can look this up, we're currently looking at the ocean and the currents. I'm not going to go in and explain all this. I'm an artist looking at the world of science through an artist's eyes, not a scientist, except in the sense of a human scientist. But we can also then look at, so that's the ocean currents that we're looking at. I think I'll just go in a little bit closer. And we can see this extraordinary, amazing patterns of what is happening offshore. And I'm just going to go into, this is the wind currents. We can see a much stronger, much more dynamic, but still also in places spiraling. And then we look at the air currents, and again, we see the same extraordinary patterns. I say extraordinary, and yet we see these patterns everywhere. They are everywhere in nature, they are everywhere in us. And that is, it's a different kind, this is a kind of pattern or a script that I'm going to lay down the foundations of with you just now, which is the preparation for what will be coming in the next, in the Etheric Geography. So I'll just go in. A bit closer again. If you want to know what I'm looking at, it's called www.earth.nullschool.net. I'll put that in the chat later. And I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint. So I'm just trying to, there. Okay, so as you see, what we have there is a snapshot at the bottom of just frozen the form, a snapshot of those dynamic movements that have, you might say, come to rest, come to a form there, and frozen in time. So this quote from Steiner: men live in the constant illusion, or let's say we human beings live in this constant illusion that we believe ourselves to be separate simply by the fact that we're enclosed in our skin. Separate they cannot be, he says, just as the finger can be nothing without the whole organism. We on Earth are, in the highest sense, in the same position as the finger on our organism, on our organism. So what we have here is a picture of that we are not separate from the world, although we are spiritual beings who are, you might say, having an earthly holiday, though it may not necessarily seem like a holiday, but we are spiritual beings in having an earthly incarnation. We are in the world, in the physical, etheric world. We are nevertheless part of that world. And through, and the idea that is pushed upon us, you might say, that we're separate, that the human being, the dualist mentality, that we're separate from the world, that there's our mind and that then there's the world, and that there's we are, it's not just that we end at the tips of our fingers, but somehow that experience we have in our consciousness today so often, that we are separate from the world, we're observers on the world. This is part of the path that we need to overcome, by opening our perceptions, by learning to read the world script, that we reconnect with the world. So reading the world ether as script, I'm going to look at with you the movements of the phenomena of water and of air, predominantly of water, but the air, and I mean, even to say water and air are separate, water and air there's always so much air in water, and they permeate each other, and you only have to think that where air and water meet, they're completely intermingled, and in the air currents there are always water, and in the water you have the air dynamics. So the movements of the water and the air both have very similar forms. And according to those of you who know my work will know that my work has been very influenced by the water scientist Theodor Schwenk, who wrote this book, Sensitive Chaos. And in that book, he says that we need to learn to read the phenomena of water and air as we read them like an alphabet of nature. Because by learning to read the world ether, we will begin to understand the spiritual substance of the cosmos. So when we look at the phenomena of water and air, we observe these archetypal movements, just as we saw in from that visualization of global weather conditions. We see these particular dynamic movements, and what we're looking at is a qualitative. We're looking at the qualities of the water and the air, their forms, their archetypal movements that one finds in these elements, not at their physical chemical composition. And then we look at the forms arising out of those movements. So Schwenk's qualitative experiments, where he observed the flow of natural water for did very intense observations of the dynamics of natural water flow. And he discovered that water is vitally active, it's complex, it's multi-stranded, it has a natural meander, so it is not unilinear. Its natural water flow is not straight, but always has a natural meander. But it always seeks to return to the spherical form. So if you think of the whole planet, the whole globe is surrounded by water and air, and you might say, sometimes everywhere where the water is, it is seeking to return to the spherical form. But we may be much more likely to see it as the natural meander movement, as we see here on that little image on the right-hand side. Water likes to spiral and weave. It likes to press against boundaries, and when it presses against those boundaries, it causes loops. And when those loops become complete and separate from it, it forms then islands. And so what we see on the right-hand side here is a river that has been in flow for a very long time, yeah? It is not a new river, but an older one, and its meander form has both shaped and is shaped by the physical element. And it constantly water finds this constant balance between the spherical and its linear course, but once again, it always seeks to return to the spherical. So here's just a diagrammatic picture of that, the abstract form. So we see here the meander flow of the river. Gradually you see these deposits where it meets the resistance of the rock or earth, and deposits are formed. Then you have here more of them, and then more here, and this, you can see then this constant pressing, flow and resistance, pressing, releasing, gradually forms what becomes then a form that separates away from the meander. And so another way of looking at it is, this is the dynamic that one sees of a force of nature pushing this way. So here we see again the linear meander form pushing down towards the sphere form. And here we have this picture here of, this is a controlled experiment that Theodor Schwenk did. And what you have here is, you see these vortices, the meander form we can see at the center here. And then gradually we see all these vortices or whirlpools are forming. So these were actually formed in this controlled experiment by having a pen drawing a straight line through viscous fluid, and this viscous fluid was in fact, glycerol was dropped into the water, and Schwenk used Lycopodium spores in order to create these patterns. And it's almost in a way you could imagine when you look at that. I have in the past shown this image to people without telling them what it is, and asked them to what they thought it was. And so often people would say they thought it was cosmic. Yeah, it was a cosmic picture, and they looked at it felt like they were looking out into the starry skies. And we can perhaps get an imagination from looking at that picture of where that famous picture by Vincent van Gogh came from, of that, those dynamics in the swirling of the sky. So what we're seeing here is that water is extremely impressionable. It's a fleck of dust, a bit of rock, a breath of air, of wind, all causes these these movements. So the water movements are shaped by both internal movements, but they also respond to the slightest external factor. So water is this archetypal substance, Schwenk calls it, extremely impressionable, shaped and formed to whatever resistances it's meet. And where you have these divergences occur as waveforms, then you have these whirlpools and these vortices are formed. Anyone, of course, who's stirred Preparation 500 will have had an active experience of this. And what you see then arising out of this constant interplay of flow and resistance is that it really points to this intrinsically creative, dynamic, formative force in the waters. Just some more examples. Here we have, sorry, they're a bit blurred. Here we have another controlled experiment showing it in a slightly different way. Amazing movements. Another controlled one here. And this one starts here. So gradually through time, you see the stronger and stronger forming, But then what actually happens at a certain point, it goes into chaos. As it moves, the chaos pattern, as the flow speeds lowers, then a chaos appears. And this is also an important aspect of the way that water moves. And here we see this in these whirlpools forming. This is off the coast of Norway, in these dynamic natural forms, swirling, yeah? So I hope I'm sure you're starting to get this kind of a picture building of water, not just as a thing as we might see in our cup or coming out of the tap, but the essential nature of water has this extraordinary meandering shape that spirals and spirals and always seeks to return to the sphere, and yet at a certain point will then go through a chaos point and then start to move again. Now, in the center of those vortices, what we have is a hollow space arises out of the undulating recursive movement. And a separate space with a life of its own is formed within the flowing movement. I wrote an article for the journal, the Anthroposophic Journal of Australia, that talked a little bit about this in relation to what this hollow space is and what this and I'd just like you to keep that picture imagination of the hollow space within this vortices. So this form is movement come to rest. What we see as form was once movement. We see how we've seen this in water, but it's actually an archetypal truth. Anyone who has studied Steiner's epochs, looking back from back into much earlier times, from the Lemurian through to the Atlantean, Rudolf Steiner talks about the world back in the Lemurian times as being in a much more fluid, formative state. In fact, he actually describes it as almost being like a sort of a moving spinach-like state in Lemuria, which kind of brings up interesting images. But what we're actually seeing is that gradually the movement slows towards a form, and it comes to rest. So another way of putting it is that the world, the material world, is at the end of God's path, is what the art historian Richter says in his book on art and human consciousness. So the world and the human being is a densification of something higher and pure and more invisible that has become a formed principle, responded to the forming principle. It becomes more visible and more condensed into matter as the life force in it slows and dies away and is released. And as we know, we then have the vessel that's left when the life force is left is a form that has no movement in it as well. So when the life force is present, though, there is always this sense of this movement, the constant process of the dissolving and binding, the dissolve and bind, the becoming, the dying away, the becoming and dying away again. And this is something that we need to recapture, or we need to consciously connect to again. That sense that we don't live in a world of static separation of where anything is analysed into its parts, but rather that we are in this and the world evolution, and we and our karma and the world ether, everything is seen as a kind of a becoming and dying away. And it's something that we have to not just know in our heads as information that we read in Steiner. We actually have to learn to see it, to be able to experience it in the world and experience in ourselves. I'd just like to look here at some of these images. Sorry. So at the top here we see the movement of the water in its fluid nature still. It's quite a sluggish water flowing, and yet we see these very slow formed whirlpools. So this is the movement still in activity. Here we see already we're closer to the forming part, where we see that in these sandbars and all these meander forms, a much slower movement, a much less movement, much less form. Here we see simply a residue of that dynamic movement that we see, that we saw, that we know are in the we know are in the water, and that we saw through those visualization of global weather pictures. We see there that we have just an after image, so to speak, of what was once something in movement. Here, of course, in the hair on the back of a child's head, we have this amazing vortice spiraling, which points to something that, well, Irmhild can speak more about in her talk. And here we have this remarkable picture which shows the spiraling fibres at the apex of the heart. So right down into the human organs, right into our heart, we have this dynamic movements that are just like here, except still in movement, but much slower than what it was in the water or the air. We have these spiraling movements that come to vortices. So we see that these archetypal forms, or these archetypal movements, which to us we see as fixed forms, are nevertheless, we have to re-enliven them and imagine thinking of your heart as being an organ that, or even being able to experience it as something that isn't just where I feel emotions, or when I have heart disease, I feel pressure, but to imagine it as that extraordinary dynamics happening at the centre of our being. Just to diverge into some art this is from the first Goethean, the ceiling of the first Goethean from the small cupola. These streaming movements, this was not just Steiner wanting to show artistic effect, or it was really what is reflected here. We again see these extraordinary dynamic movements everywhere, around all the beings, across the Christ figure, streaming through the rhythmic system. The Luciferic figure, the streaming dynamic spiraling, right, all one world of spiritual world ether streaming through all of them. Again, in the sculpture, again, it's not artistic effect that Steiner used all these carving. It's actually to make visible the invisible forces streaming through these beings. Here is, this isn't directly from the sculpture itself, this is an artist's impression of it made in metal, of the Luciferic figure, yeah? The only place we don't see it is in Ahriman, the head of Ahriman, which has this really is form with no movement, yeah? The complete picture of the sclerosis where the form has died away and there has been no renewal. And of course, this is from the red window of the Goethean, again, this coming into the vortice, streaming out, coming into the vortice, streaming out. Here again, in some drawing in more abstracted form, again we see these forces, what we see as a fixed picture, we need to learn to see as a dynamic movement. So if one sees it in the line, the line has no real reality. It's a dead. But when we look at it here, we can start to see through the shaded drawing this feeling of you can bring the line into movement, that dynamic movement. And then here is another way of showing how that dynamic lifting, you might say raising the line out of its dead movement, one-dimensional aspect, and bringing it into movement. I'm sure all of you are familiar with form drawing. Now imagine form drawing as dynamic drawing, where instead of one focuses on the form, but always it's done out of the dynamic. And the more you work with that dynamic, the more it enlivens that dynamics, the forms within you. Anyone who sat through a class of dynamic drawing will go away feeling inwardly, literally inwardly moved. So when I'm talking about water here, water not just as the stuff that comes out of the tap, but water as the archetypal substance of transformation, as it says down the bottom here. By renouncing every fixed substance, water becomes the carrier of all substance transformation. By starting to see the world as movement rather than as form, as and experience the world of nature as movement rather than form, we can start to enliven our perception, enliven our thinking, and bring much more dynamic movement into our being. I have a short exercise. I've just got a little bit of time. You've been patiently listening to us talk. Now I'd like everyone to try a little exercise that gives a little bit of a taster of the kind of thing in the Etheric Geography conference that I would like to do, more experiential practice-based exercises. And this is an exercise given by Steiner for cognitive mobility. So I'd like you to sit back and close your eyes. And in your mind's eye, I would like you to imagine a very small, let's say a wisp of cloud appears in the sky on your mind's eye. And it's moving, it's not static, it's moving, and even as you watch it, I would like you to start building it. I would like you to start, it moves in spiral forms, it moves, it starts to disperse a little bit, but now start to build it up. I'd like you to start building up your cloud by literally pulling in wisps of other cloud towards it. So you start to build and build, all in your mind's eye, a larger and larger cloud. And try to keep the cloud moving, even as we saw those air forms earlier on, or even just imagine it's not a fixed cloud stuck on a painting or in a photo, but it is, as one sees it in the sky, always forming and reforming. I'd like you to build it up so it's deeper and darker and deeper and darker until that cloud starts to fill your whole mind's eye. And then I'd like you to start wisp by wisp, little bit by a little bit, start to loosen it. Gets a little bit lighter, the edges start to fly away, and imagine now that you're going to reverse that process you went through earlier of building it up. You're now going to very gradually allow it to slowly disperse away. The slower you can do this, the better it is. And you just keep dispersing it and dispersing it. Parts of it fly out to the periphery, gets lighter, softer, smaller, until you're left with only a small wisp, which you then can blow away. And then if we had time, you'd start and do the whole thing again. And you would start from that tiny wisp and you would start to gradually build it up. And Rudolf Steiner gives this exercise as an exercise in developing the kind of mobility that is required in our thinking process in order to be able to think like water, to be able to have a dynamic, living quality in our thinking, so that we don't just have thoughts which appear randomly in our heads, but we begin to experience our thinking as this dynamic, living quality. And he says that with regards to living thinking, that as long as a person does not feel the working and creating of an idea, if you literally don't experience the working of an idea and the creating of it, and the building up of it, just as you built up that cloud form in your mind's eye, then your thinking remains separate from nature. As soon as you feel an idea living and active, then you can start to look upon yourself and nature as one whole. And then the subjective in your inner life becomes objective, and the objective is raised to the spirit. So think about that without actually the experiencing of our thinking will always remain abstracted and not living. And that is where I'd like to finish. So I am going to now hand you over to Irmhild. Irmhild, where are you? You're muted, Irmhild. You're still muted.
How's that?
Now you're not mute.
Okay. Bear with me a moment. So we need to get my slides up. Are you going to spotlight me, Fiona?
You are spotlighted.
Oh, am I? I can see everyone else. That's interesting.
Don't worry about it. I can only see you and the slides.
All right, lovely. Hello, everyone. So I'd like to introduce my research into the microcosmic human being. With the development of new technology into really looking into the living human organism, we can discover all these remarkable similarities between nature and the universe and the microcosm of the inner world of the human being. Scientists are quite astounded by these mysterious processes that have been discovered in the organs and the cells. And they place us in awe of these hidden forces that are involved in the ebb and flow of life. For me, they reveal these sacred microcosmic landscapes and ecosystems that are held in a delicate balance and confirm much of what we have come to know through spiritual scientific research. Everything is immersed in the etheric world. In this blackboard drawing by Rudolf Steiner, you can see how he describes how the outer world and the universe are reflected in the inner regions of the human body, and that the ether body of the human being is actually built up out of the cosmos. You can see these forces reflected in the relationship between the brain and the world of nature, particularly the plant world. And here you can see this dandelion seed ball, which looks like a starry universal region, and how the electroencephalogram of the human brain actually lights up like the stars at night in the starry skies. Or you can see how the dandelion seed can be compared to an embryonic kidney cell. This reminds me actually also of a blackboard drawing where Rudolf Steiner draws a little dandelion seed and speaks about being touched by the astral. So it's again this picture that Fiona brought of the relationship of air and water working together within the regions not only of the plant world, but also within the inner regions of the human being. Or you can see this in the cross-section of a human brain with all its intricate nervous system, all these wonderful meandering forms that look just like the roots of a plant. And in here, you can see these wonderful meandering forms again. This, what's described by the scientists as streaming potential, that is considered as one of the most important mechanisms to moderate the function of osteoblasts and osteocytes in bone growth, remodeling and fracture repair. So the etheric body is the life force, the streaming potential for growth, regeneration and renewal. You have to imagine this in a living, active dynamic and not just as a fixed photograph as such. Even inside the human cell, there is a complex social and communal activity occurring, much like a busy city that's illuminated at night. And this is the time when the etheric body is involved in all these important tasks of regeneration and renewal and restoration. The etheric body also leaves its imprints and its impressions upon the physical body, like a unique fingerprint. And here again, you can see similar pictures to what Fiona showed of this meandering quality of the etheric forces that leave their imprint into the physical body. And even the microflora and fauna in the body play their part to regulate and maintain the etheric body. They even influence the DNA in the body and can change it. All tissues are permeated by body fluids, like an etheric ocean that sustains life. It is a submerged, subconscious world, as you can see in this lung epithelial tissue. In cosmosophy, lectures that Rudolf Steiner gave between October and November in 1921, Rudolf Steiner describes this subconscious region as a picture world of weaving thoughts, a sea of images where the phosphorescent radiance of the human being is the result of everything implanted into the etheric body via the astral body and the ego during life. And he says that this sea of images, this subconscious region, is the only way that the etheric body, we can't really perceive it through life. And we only get a glimpse of it in that period just after death, when this review of our life reveals all those impressions that have been absorbed by the etheric body before it then dissolves into the world ether. We can only glimpse the effect of the etheric forces in movement that has come to rest in form, such as what Fiona mentioned again, how movement comes down into form. And here you can see how much these alveoli look so similar to coral. And the liver cell, too, reveals this wonderful artistry of the chemical ether. It's like an abstract painting. Or in the heart tissue, where we can see the meandering blood. Again, those meandering forms like a landscape. And even in our immune cells, you can see how nature is mimicked, like by this bacteriophage, which is in the immune system attacking an abnormal cancer cell. And here it looks so much like a little ant, which is an indication from the point of view of our prescribing for formic acid, which we also use to help dissolve tumours in the body. And you can see the spherical tendencies, the spherical forms arising in all the cells of the body, but in particular you find it in this incredibly beautiful image of the stem cell. And here I'm reminded of this cosmic region again, of the starry world. And the stem cell is a cell that is like a substrate for everything else. And the stem cells are produced in the head of the femur bone, and then they're sent to the spleen. And the spleen then makes the decision of where to send these cells to become more specialized for different functions in different organs. Some of these stem cells end up becoming immune cells. They go to the police academy in the thymus gland and are trained how to be good immune cells. And others are sent to the liver to be filled with blood and enter into the bloodstream. Of course, there's a lot of research being done on the human stem cell now in terms of trying to clone it as well and play with it to develop different specialized human beings, really. And you can see the spherical form again in the dewdrop here, that bears all this etheric potential of water. So water is actually the signature of the etheric, and it has a memory, as can be seen by these slides from Masaru Emoto. And many of you will know these pictures, and how, for instance, you can see the spring water, fresh, clear, bright, shining crystals, or the fountain in Lourdes. Or you can look at the water at the bottom where you have the dam water before and after offering a prayer. You get this wonderful picture of this luminescent quality that arises out of the etheric forces of the water. And so when water is rocked in the process of rhythmical succussion with a substance to produce an anthroposophic homeopathic remedy, we are in fact involved in the activity of transubstantiation. The substance is opened up and relieved of its physical burden, and it releases its formative forces, that is, its etheric forces. And such a remedy is always an invitation, never suppressing or release or enforcing change. And that's why homeopathic anthroposophic medicines are often very disappointing, because they don't force us to change or to get well, or to fix us or to suppress an illness, but they invite us to participate in a ritual of healing. They make a humble offering for us to change out of our own inner freedom, our own inner wish to engage with these etheric forces. Ultimately, though, I believe that the heart is the real potentizer of the human being. It potentizes the human spirit with its rhythmical succussion between center and periphery. And in this picture, this angiogram, you can see the luminescence of the sun-like quality of the heart as it etherizes the blood. And this is what can be experienced with the Rose Cross meditation, especially for healers who develop diagnostic intuition. The ritual of healing also embraces convalescence, and the etheric body is a time body. It takes time to heal, to recover, and to realign yourself with the pace of nature and the pace of the macrocosm. In his lectures on cosmosophy, Rudolf Steiner refers to the human being as an image of the world, and the world as an image of the finally dissolved essence of the human being. That's all I wanted to share with you today, was that beginning of my research and fascination into the microcosmic world of the human being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hild. So what we're going to do now is, Martin, would you like to unmute yourself and just give us a little recap, a little bit of an overview, and then we will talk about where are we going with this, because this was advertised as a preparatory webinar. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you, Hild. It's been a wonderful journey between the three talks. It's almost impossible to give an overview, but it is a wonderful lemniscatory journey between the weaving of the starry worlds, the capacity of the starry worlds to inspire our thoughts, but then the effect of human thinking, art, artistic meditative thoughts upon the stars, and then how that's also reflected in the formative forces of the air and the water of the earth, that they reflect the actual dynamics of what's going on in the human being. And then also with Ermhild's talk on through the microscopic photography, to see that these dynamics, these formative forces that are both, you know, flowing, linear, but also structural from, not in a sclerotic way, but in the living substance of the human being, are all reflective of each other. It really does show that old adage of Hermes Trismegistus of as above, so below. We almost have to say in the light of our talk is as above, so in the middle, and so too below. Or as within the human being, so without in the cosmos. So without in the cosmos, so too within the earth and within the human being. There's this real living trinity between the human being, the formative force of nature, and the starry worlds around us. This also epitomized in the rhythms of the planets in the skies, obviously. So yeah, that kind of hopefully doesn't give the detail, but certainly that there's a thread between the formative forces of the movement of the stars and planets, the living script of the etheric spiritual world in nature, but also then the capacity of the human organism to bring forth thought, consciousness in the way that it does in human and through language. So hopefully we've found a way to represent that today, where one can go away feeling enthusiastic about being part of this living organism of our cosmos and the universe and the human being. Maybe that's enough of a wrap up, Fiona.
Yeah, okay. Would you like to?
If you want to add something?
I would like to think that I noticed, I'm looking in the chat and people are thanking us, which is lovely. And I'm glad you're finding our research is inspiring. Because, you know, this is original research, and although we're drawing on Steiner or Schwenk or other people, nevertheless, this is something that we are taking forward out of our own work. And I would like to think, when I noticed that somebody said beautiful images that we've presented to you, I would like to think that you would take these images into sleep tonight and that they will work upon you in the night. And this is the important thing with so often we have these experiences and then we don't allow them to sink down within us and to work upon us. Yeah, we go off, perhaps we make a phone, we leave this webinar, and we're all guilty of this. We go off, we go and make a cup of tea, somebody rings us, we chat, we check our emails, and that, you might say, that after image of the experience is lost. We don't sit with it. So it would be, I think, wonderful, and it's also wonderful preparation for what we're hoping to do next time, is to be able to take these images into sleep, or perhaps to try that exercise I gave for cognitive flexibility again. But you need to repeat it many times, not just the once as we did. And perhaps we could now say, I know I would like to share a little bit about what I would like to do next time, but perhaps Martin, you would like to now just give the bigger picture of what happens next.
So, yeah, we had been asked by the New South Wales branch to do a second Etheric Geography conference. We had set a date in September. We've already advertised that date. in our discussions, one of the questions is how did we come to our research questions? One of our discussions initially between Ermhild and myself was, what is the effect of consciousness and of thinking upon health? The health of the earth, the health of the human being. How does that all work? And this is a wonderful sort of premise as a sort of a taster for that. And it's become obvious in conversation with the New South Wales branch that it's not going to be a face-to-face conference on the 17th, 18th and 19th of September. But we thought as our group, we would continue offering this sort of level of webinar towards a time where we can get together again. The Linawell School in Maitland has offered us again their premises, and we're not sure entirely when that's going to be possible to do a face-to-face. We were going to do it last year, a year after the first one. It's now 2 years after the first one, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit longer in the making. We inwardly sort of saying maybe November, but we shall see how that will be allowed or not. It will depend upon restrictions of gathering and traveling, obviously. Today, the whole of New South Wales has gone into lockdown, so it's not looking very good. So what we thought we would do is we would offer on that weekend, on the Saturday the 17th, another one of these days, possibly longer than 2 hours, where we go into some of the themes of how does this really work, the effect of thinking in how humans think, because of course other creatures think and have consciousness, but how does our human thinking, our structuring of thought into sacred texts and meditations affect landscape, affect the world we live in, and how does our thought affect healing, all those different things. So we were up for a continuation of this theme of the broad idea of etheric geography, or the interaction between cosmos, human being, and landscape, or the Earth's environments, to present another theme in that direction. So we hope to continue that. I know our conversations with the New South Wales branch is that they're very supportive of us preparing it like this. When it becomes a face-to-face conference, it'll be an event presented through the New South Wales branch, if I get that correctly. So that's kind of the future direction. And this could be, judging by the response today, as I said at the beginning, I was anticipating being up in the Hunter Valley with, 4 or 5 people out on a property up at the top of Vermont Road at Jacqueline's place, looking at the stars tonight, and suddenly we've got this wonderful gathering of people who are really interested in this theme. So this could be a very good way for us to develop our capacity to, as Fiona was saying, to take it out of this context, take it with us, reflect upon the images, the ideas, and then walk into tomorrow, into the next months, and really take a look, go out at night, look at the stars, look at the plants and the various things in different ways, watch the clouds, and meditate upon those exercises as a way of us learning how to be spiritual in the world today in a way that's nurturing and healing. So that's really our intention. We continue to research. I mean, we've really just been thrown together quite recently in this constellation, but we're quite enjoying the journey. So thanks for joining us. I don't know who wants to start with where we might go in September. I might just, Fiona, should I just roll on into that?
Yes. If you like to say what you will be doing at the next time, so in September.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, what I will bring in September is a theme that I've worked on for many years, which is, we could call it a multiculturalism or a cross-cultural study of how different peoples across the earth, and I've worked with some Aboriginal cultures in South Australia over many years on song lines, ley lines, also the ley lines in the dreaming stories in the sky. What I described today was a bit of a beginning of a description of a song line. I'm just looking at one of the questions from Hannah there, is how can we take these exercises to the urgent and natural aromatization of our earth at the moment. This is exactly the kind of work we're wanting to be doing, is to learn more how to experience when I am sitting in a landscape, in a world, in a society, in a city, in a particular suburb, that how do I experience that when I'm doing my work, when I'm doing my dreaming work, my sacred work, that it is actually having effect upon the collective and upon the life forces, the vital forces. I think today was the premise of that, is that there is a deep vitality that's connected through human thinking into the vitality of health of a society, into the vitality of our fellow human beings, into the vitality, right down into the viral vitality and lack of vitality that's required there. That there's a way that we can learn to experience how our inner life works upon the healing of environment. And environment, we can bring in layers of environment. So I would like to work with bringing some of the pictures of the working with landscape in an anthroposophical way that correlates deeply with the Aboriginal ways of songlines and sorry business and healing business in the Aboriginal people that I've worked with in South Australia years ago, and have come to some insight about that. So really translating our language, building bridges between other cultures, Druidic cultures, to show that this is actually something that humanity really understands, is that there is a deep relationship between the formed spiritual work of thinking and the health of the body, the health of the environment, and the health of then the future of the cosmos. So I would bring some very applied pictures out of that. So that might be enough said, Fiona, and then Hild.
Okay, so what will be working with next time, I actually, for the face-to-face, I had a whole raft of experiential exercise, practical work of a couple of hours, both out in nature and inside in the workshop. Obviously, I will not be able to do the out in nature online, but I've already been working on mentally working just in the past 24 hours, how I can bring some of these experiential exercises, of which the one I worked with very briefly with you today is just the beginning. And so I would be building directly on I guess literally on the meander form, and on working directly on the foundations that I laid down today. But what I would be doing is that I would be taking it into the realm of how do we become more dynamic in our thinking. So that is my key, perhaps my key area of research, is the development of living thinking, the redemption of thinking, as Steiner saw as one of his main missions. How to develop a living thinking and enlivening our thinking forces. And I have, as I said, what I would be doing next time would be practical exercises online. So you would have to come along and be prepared to do something with us. And someone has just asked, are there exercises in nature ahead of what we can do when we come to, so that there's some preparation? I think that's wonderful. If somebody wants to do some preparation in advance, I was already going to suggest, somebody's asked, are the slides going to be available? Well, of course, they will be part of the recording that will be available to you all sometime during the week after I've had edited out, just, packaged it a little bit better. So you'll be able to review images and thoughts and particular things that inspired you from the 3 different presentations. And what I would, and I can also give you some references to, if you want to do some reading. Obviously, Schwenk's book on sensitive chaos is a starting point, but I would also suggest that for my work that you go back and look at I showed a number of drawings and look at that dynamic way of working with the line. You can even start to work with that yourself. And so you might observe it in nature, or you can even, you can see it. You've got a microscope, you can see it on the flat area of your finger. You can see the whorls and spirals that come to rest in the center of your fingerprint. And you can start to work with that. You can work with it with dynamic drawing. It is very important, though, with the dynamic drawing that it must be in movement. You're not focused on the form. You must work with the spiral or the lemniscate or whatever forms that you particularly like, but they must be in movement, and you repeat them until you start to feel that movement within yourself. So you walk away and you actually feel it within you. So you can do that through drawing, or you can do that in your head. Yeah.
I might also just add a thing there, Fiona, is that out of sort of my thing, it would be worthwhile over the next months to, when you are saying a verse or doing a meditation or doing a reading, to just imagine the stars are listening to you. We can go out at night and learn to see the stars, which is, I would always be advising. It's difficult if you're obviously suburban, but even if one's, it doesn't have to be at nighttime, but try and picture which sun sign is relevant. So right now, Leo, and over the next few weeks, whenever you're meditating, just in a sort of a willing, feeling observation, feel the stars receiving our thoughts and what that means. That's a kind of a daily thing one can be doing, to say there is a deep connection between what the stars speaking to us through the sun, and now I'm speaking into them as well. It might be something to do. Hield?
Well, I'm coming back to that. I've got this thing in front of my face. There we go. I'm coming back to this conversation we had, Martin, about how thoughts can affect us in many different ways. Certainly, how thoughts are kind of an etheric force in their own right. And so one of the areas that interests me a great deal is the field of psychoneuroimmunology, and the research that looks into how the healing thoughts or fear can influence immunity. So I'd like to perhaps present a little bit more on that, and also to think a little bit about how our thoughts influence also the health of other human beings, because that's very relevant to the times we live in now. And, because you're a festival man, Martin, I keep thinking we should have a festival. We should have a festival of healing. What is a festival of healing? What does that mean as a group, as a community, as a healing community? Is there something that we can offer as a healing thought, a festival of healing process towards the stars, towards the cosmos that needs us as much as we need them? Even in these regions of, as you know, I'm involved in death care as well, these regions of those who've passed the threshold. How can we work with them? The other side of it is also, these slides are just wonderful. They reflect on the whole, they're reflecting healthy processes in the body tissues, but also in my research, I've found a lot of obviously slides that also depict illness. And it would be good to look at comparisons between healthy tissue and unhealthy tissue. And that just comes back a bit to what you were saying, Fiona, about, those flow forms that aren't present in the figure of Ahriman, for instance. So what happens with illness is there a loss of that form, flow, movement quality. So I'd like to perhaps explore that too now. I might be biting off more than I can chew at the moment. And the other work that unbelievably interests me is the work of Johannes Rohan in his book on functional morphology. And he has this whole picture of how our organs and our cells are actually changing and evolving. And he brings right at the end of his book a whole section on the resurrection body. And that might be for far down the future, but it's a very, very interesting subject or topic to think about as well. So there you go. I'm always
There's a small program.
Yeah, taking off. Maybe it's 3 different things we do.
Well, fortunately, we can probably keep coming back at this theme. I mean, I really like the idea of the Festival of Healing and the resurrection body. I'm writing it down for our next conversation to plan.
Great.
And the nice thing would be that when we do meet, 17th of September is very close to the equinox. So maybe something can be brought in that vein. Be great.
I think we're coming close to 6 o'clock now. And so I think it would be good if we wrapped up. As you can see, we're dying to share our research with you as well as with each other. And we do think we've got a lot that we can work with. I'm looking at all the questions which I will have a copy of. And we'll take these questions on board. Some people have asked for exercises. I can provide some exercises. They won't take very long. Even if you would do them in your mind's eye, that would be wonderful, because everything that we do will, whether it's, as Martin says, will speak to the stars. And the spiritual world will open their ears and their attention will be caught by us engaging these activities. And in a way, the fact that so many of us, I know not everybody is in this situation, but so many of us perhaps are in lockdown, it gives us an opportunity to perhaps do more of this work than would be normally if we were having to, we'd be out in the world. Yeah. So this perhaps is a great opportunity for us. If there aren't any more questions, or if there isn't anything else that Martin or Imhild would like to say, I would just like to wrap up. The video recording will be available, as I said, sometime during the week, and you can use it for review. And just once again, I'd like to thank everybody for coming along and supporting us in our research. And we're really excited that so many people were interested and have enjoyed it. And after 2 hours are still here. So thank you again.